I took this one, honestly, because I care so much about this, and I said to our staff, no, I want to stop by there because I want to thank the Black Women's Health Imperative, and I just love the fact that we are finally talking about these issues. A lot have to do with Jill Biden, who's really taken this on in a big way, that women weren't even required to be included in medical studies until 1993, and because of that, we're still playing catch up when it comes to solutions.
Making the awareness known to everyone. Thank you. Because what we do in Congress is codify the work you've done for years and decades. So I thank everybody for being here. This is our moment. And I am so confident looking at your faces that we will meet this moment and exceed this moment.
It doesn't paint the whole picture. According to the CDC, yes, Black women are still 3 times more likely than white women to die from pregnancy. However, studies have shown, regardless of education and social economic status, we are dying. Access to quality healthcare is a big problem for this country, for all groups. But this problem, the Black maternal mortality, is much more simple than just thinking access.
Challenges in the women's health field. So from your perspective, we've heard a little bit of context. What are the most pressing challenges facing women's health today? And how can we empower patients or community to be able to make informed decisions to address these challenges?
I can start. Can you hear me in the back? My mic's on? All right. So as my lovely introduction mentioned, I'm a physician and I'm also a researcher and I'm also an advocate and I'm also a woman. So Dr. Bio's comments and experiences really resonated with me because I'm sure all of us have experiences that we can share where we've been discounted or dismissed. I think when it comes to women's health, I mean, big picture, all of it is important because it's been overlooked for so many years, right? As was mentioned, women were not included in clinical trials. There's medications that we use now that were never included, women were not included in those trials. So women's physiology is different. And when you prescribe medications, sometimes they respond differently. When our symptoms are discounted, it's because the traditional thought is you have a heart attack, you have an elephant sitting on your chest. That's not how many women present when they have a heart attack. Many women have strokes and no one even knows that they're having a stroke because their symptoms are so different from what was published in those studies from years ago and even recent studies. So to answer your question, what is the most pressing thing and how can we change it? Well, one, menopause is obviously becoming, I mean, the fact it was discussed at the Super Bowl, that's huge. And I think that there's a huge focus right now on making it more socially okay to talk about women's health. I think for years we weren't allowed to talk about these things. I mean, I still consider myself young, but for generations, we're not allowed to talk about periods or cramps. Right now it's week of the DNC, so I'm gonna mention something that's been in the news. There's been an insult flung around to hopefully our future VP that he was putting tampons in bathrooms. Providing free tampons in bathrooms should not be something that you can use to insult someone. That it doesn't make sense to me. It's like the silliest insult. So I'm not completely answering your question because it's such a broad question. I don't even know where to begin on what needs to be focused on. But I think the focus needs to start with these conversations. And the fact that we can talk about fertility, the fact that when Roe v. Wade was overturned, we saw this huge shift where it's not just abortion care that's being affected, it's IVF. My cancer patients, some of them might have to terminate a wanted pregnancy when they're diagnosed with cancer. People forget that that is all involved when it comes to healthcare policy around reproductive health. I think that the way we change things is we talk about it and then we talk to our policymakers and then we talk about it some more. And we don't just talk about it with people who have uteruses. We talk about it with, thank you to all of the non-uterus people in this room. We appreciate you for being here because it takes allies to move things forward. And when we talk about women of color, that is a huge So to answer your question, what needs to be focused on and what do we need to change? We need to focus on all of it, but we need to get women in clinical trials. We need to have a huge focus on women of color because the inequities are even wider and the maternal mortality is just one example of how many ways that women of color are overlooked. They aren't enrolled in clinical trials. I'm gonna give a shout out to University of Illinois Cancer Center, where 80% of patients enrolled in clinical trials are people of color, Latin American community, the Black community in Illinois and beyond. Nationally, that number is less than 5% usually. So we need to change that. We need to get more women into clinical trials. We need more clinical trials focused on actually driving change on the things that matters. And we need to make it not a taboo topic to talk about women's health. Because until we can talk about it without blushing, we're not gonna be able to drive change.
Love it. I love it. And so we will have the opportunity to speak a little bit more on clinical trials, and we have some folks who have expertise in bringing folks to the table in clinical trials. Does anyone else have anything they want to add to this first question? Yes.
I think I'll add that we talked a lot about reproductive health. We talked about menopause. We talked about a lot of women's specific conditions, and I think that's one of the things we think about when we think about women's health. However, there's so much more to women's health than just our reproductive organs. And I'm a basic scientist, I'm a biochemist, so I think one of the things that I'd like to share with you is that the enzymes in your liver process drugs differently than a man's. Your microbiome is different because of your sex. And also, you probably don't know this, but because of your gender and your dietary habits and the way you engage in society. And so when we think about women's health, we need to think about all of the parts of the body that encompasses. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that today. But until we start thinking about women's health as all aspects of our health, lung cancer, brain health, I mean, I could go on and on where all these sex differences occur, and that's where we're beginning to see health disparities in the fact that men and women present differently for different diseases and disorders. In order to develop better treatments and improve the health of all people, not just women, we really need to start looking at that.
I want to go back to access, because I think that's vitally important. I mean, I think it's so important that I change careers. I used to be a professor of 19th century French art history at the University of Chicago. And in 2018, I decided to make a change. So I went back to school, got 2 degrees in biotechnology and bioethics with a focus on clinical trials. Then, in 2019, went to Northwestern Pritzker School of Law, graduated with honors, with a law focus on healthcare, health law, and administrative law, focusing on regulations. And I'll tell you why I decided to make such a seismic shift like that. In 2002, I was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. I'm here. I am alive, cancer-free. I have a 17-and-a-half-year-old daughter who's at the University of Chicago's laboratory schools, who's a neurobiology student. How is that possible? That you can have cancer in your colon, cancer in your uterus, in your right ovary, left fallopian tube closed, cancer on your gallbladder, and a portion of it on your liver. So a foot of my colon was removed, gallbladder was removed, half of my liver was removed, and it regenerated itself. My uterus was completely reconstructed, and the cyst over my right ovary removed, and my left fallopian tube, over time, it opened. Anyone in this room, and I certainly have this story that's repeated over and over and over again in my family. You were given a cancer diagnosis, and within 2 years, you're dead. This is over 22 years ago. It is because of doctors, and she was not my doctor, because she was at UIC and not the University of Chicago, but it is because the doctors at the University of Chicago had one agenda, and that was to keep me alive. That is access. I live on the south side of Chicago. I live in Hyde Park. There were Black women that were in that hospital with me at the same time when I had my surgery, December 12th. 2 of those Black women are now dead. They have the same kind of disease that I had. I also had a bowel obstruction 2 weeks after that, which almost killed me. When I was in the emergency room, laying in bed, there was an older Black woman who was in the bed next to mine. And the ER attendant was shoving a hose into her nose. Within 5 minutes, 2 residential surgeons came in, whisked me upstairs to oncology ICU, asked me what was my favorite music. So we were listening to Diana Krall. As 4 attendants was there, one of which telling me, the residence that's in front is telling me she presents that similar holes and tells me what she's gonna do with it. There's a black woman that tells me she's gonna rub my throat, and on the count, every time she snaps her finger, I'm to swallow to get that tube down into my stomach. So there was an entire team of people in that place that kept me alive. And although I was on machines throughout all of Christmas, and I spent Christmas Eve watching Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve with tubes and machines keeping me alive, I got out of there in March of 2003. And then left and went to Paris and stayed there for 3 years to do my research, and then came back. But nothing ever, that never left me. Not the fact that I survived, I'm happy that I survived, but the fact that how many other black women died just so one can live. Again, I love being alive, I'm happy that I'm here. But having access, it doesn't matter if you do not have access. These women were in the same hospital that I was in. One black guy, I met him, and his mom had surgery. I had surgery 7 a.m. in the morning on December 12th. Hers was in the afternoon. She had colon cancer as well. And I had started rattling off every doctor that I had. Oh, did she have Dr. Alberti, Dr. Cohen, Dr. Alopade? I just rattled off all their names. And that brother looked at me and said, I don't know who you're talking about. We never met any of those people. And in that instant, I thought, oh my God, we might as well have been in 2 different universes. So I am incredibly mindful, angry, focused, and determined to create access, not only for black women, but for every person that's here. Because even when I went to see my GI surgeon, there was a white man that was in the waiting room trying to see this same guy. I got to see him the day my doctor set up an appointment the afternoon before, and I was seeing Dr. Alberti at 9 o'clock. And that man was sitting in there trying to at least get to see one of them. He too died. So it is access. That should never, ever happen. Not in a country that is the wealthiest country in all of humankind. The wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of God's green earth. And people are dying. So when I would tell my story to people, I often would hear the same thing. Oh, well, you have really good health insurance. I was a graduate student. Let's be real about the level of health insurance that I had. But I was taken care of. Dr. Cohen, Dr. Alberti, Dr. Schultz, every one of those people were like, Ms. McCullough, I've done this 100 times. You are gonna be fine. And all I thought was, you should have told that to my grandma. So even at another form of access, my grandmother had colon cancer and died in 1995. Dr. Alopade said, Bridget, I'd like for you to we're going to get your grandmother's cancer cells from the pathology department where she died. And we're gonna see if those are the same cells that match the cancer cells in your colon. Fortunately, they weren't, because the ones that she had were incredibly aggressive. But the fact that you can even do something like that, the fact that you cut a liver in half and it grows back. And the biggest thing was when Dr. Alberti told me, when I kept crying and I said to him, am I going to die? And he said, Bridget, you and people in your generation will live to be 120 years old. I was happy as all get out, because I've always been convinced I'm not gonna die. So I thought, this is good, this is living proof of that. And I asked him how is that possible? He said through medicine and technology. Medicine, meaning people like him, and technology, stem cells, and almighty CRISPR-Cas9, which is a gene editing tool. So when I looked at the fact that people are talking about you're gonna live at a minimum 120 years old. So that is why I decided to start my company, to start a cure, to create access.
I love it, I love it. So we've heard about access to not just care, but quality care. We've heard about a comprehensive understanding of what women's health needs. We've heard about narrative change and the need for clinical trials. Donna, do you have anything you want to add before we jump to the next question?
The final piece I'll add is from an investor perspective. It's so odd to this day that I still meet so many investors that view women's health as such a niche field, and I do believe that's been a huge barrier from there being more dollars in there. And so this is why the onus is on us to really change that narrative, because just like what Nikki and some of the others have said, this is a big problem, right? We're not just talking about women-specific conditions like endometriosis, for instance, but also diseases that affect women disproportionately, like autoimmune, and also diseases that affect women differently, like cardiovascular and beyond. So we need to help people understand just the sheer magnitude and the multiple sub-markets within that as well, because that will help people understand just how massive the opportunity is in front of us and be able to funnel more dollars. Dollars alone won't solve everything, of course, but it's a huge, huge beginning to be able to get the innovation, research, and commercialization of the technology that we need.
And extremely instrumental to move the needle. We've reached out to over 8 million patients. We are enrolling anywhere from 46 to 52% of people of color. But what we're doing, first and foremost, is opening up our locations, building out clinical trial centers that do a couple things. Number one, first, become a welcome hub to educate people on what a clinical trial is. We heard today, most people don't even know what a clinical trial is, let alone just understand the value of clinical research as part of their care journey. Can be very vital for their care. Two, we know that people have mistrust and fear. So part of our hubs is to kind of start to educate folks to understand the value clinical research can have on their care. And then two, we've opened it up to provide screening, diagnostic, and phlebotomy services. So today, we have now 20 research centers that'll be in full activation. We are running over 40 clinical trials. We have proof points that have, as we complete clinical trials, we issue those proof points out to the industry and the regulators to show the role pharmacy can play in clinical research. We know that we can't do this alone. It's going to require an ecosystem of partners to unlock the issues that we all are talking about. We all know we can go through the same statistics over and over again, but ultimately we still are seeing communities still not being invited to clinical research.
For example, in an Alzheimer's study, we recruited nearly twice the national average of Hispanic patients, signaling from the community that clinical trials are resonating with these populations historically underrepresented in drug development trials. And by the way, why is this important? Hispanics have a twofold higher prevalence of disease than non-Hispanic whites in the US, according to the Alzheimer's Association. Hispanic patients have unique barriers to participation, such as uncertainty about their private health information. Thus, gaining access to therapeutic innovation could prove more difficult. We have to be there with communities, learn from communities, hear from communities, and incorporate what communities share with us in our strategies for clinical trial participation. And that does not happen in traditional clinical trials. We visit our medical doctor. If this location within our communities is also the place where we can gain access to the medical innovations that are more commonly shared in the academic medical centers among the academic community, then this could be game-changing in our communities. COVID-19 taught us a lot. We don't have to repeat that because we do want to get to the reception. Among the goals of Walgreens Clinical Trials business are the improvement in the overall experience of care. We heard from Dr. BCW earlier that sometimes it's the discrimination or the racism in the room. Didn't happen in the time when Tuskegee was going on or in Mrs. Henrietta Lack's lifetime. It happened today or yesterday, and it happened to us or someone that looks like us. One of the ways that we are doing this in providing the improvement in experience is by actively engaging patients in clinical trials early in the end-to-end process, not as the afterthought that somebody had leftover budget for and now can be sprinkled on the problem. We are not making assumptions about what patients want, because as this doctor just said, it's about the data.
IVF and other fertility treatments. And how are we recruiting for all of these jobs in the healthcare industry and funding it and recognizing that implicit bias is real and touches us every single day. There is gender bias, and then there is race bias, and then sometimes there is age bias. And if we are not even woke enough to recognize those things, it makes it so much harder when we are trying to take care of ourselves or when we are trying to advocate for those that we take with us to the doctor's office. Hosted a senior sex seminar in my district, and I was surprised to hear from so many women who said, after I, hit 50 or 55, my doctor stopped wanting to give me pap smears, as if everything had shut down. And we have to push because they hadn't done the research to assess that, life is still going on for many of the women in our communities, and are we making sure that we are still providing them the sexual health that they need to make sure that they can live their life safely and healthily.
All of us to educate people about our health needs at every single stage of life. And Liz is right. We've had a lot of attention on women's reproductive health, and that is very important. But women live a long time, and we do a lot of other things in addition to making families. And we have to have all the choices, all the tools, and we have to have healthcare providers who know how to take care of our needs.
Our daughters, our mothers, our sisters. So I am proud to be a part, proud to be invited here, and I look forward to working with you more. Thank you, God bless you.